hello, and welcome back to the Happy Horse Nutrition Podcast. I'm Dr Nerida, founder of the My Happy Horse Nutrition app, PhD equine nutritionist, and lover of brilliant science. And today we are bringing back my conversation with Professor Brian Nielsen, because the ideas in this episode are grounded in some of my favourite science ever and are too important to stay buried. This episode was one of the standout episodes from the very early days of the podcast, and even back when the audience was much smaller, it was a popular episode. Now that many more of you are listening, thank you so much, it felt like the right time to bring it back. Bone health is one of those topics that matters so much more than people often realise. It affects soundness, performance, and the long-term well-being of our horses. And in this conversation, Professor Brian, who is the world's leading researcher in this space, explains the science of optimising bone health in a way that will genuinely change how you think about raising, training, and managing horses. If you think that bone strength is built mainly through long, slow work, or that protecting young horses means avoiding early high-speed exercise, this episode may really make you stop and think. So if you missed it the first time, or if you would like to just listen with fresh ears, here again is my conversation with Professor Brian Nielsen on bone health. Professor Brian, welcome to the Happy Horse Nutrition Podcast.
Thank you so much. It is so great to be with you. As always, I always enjoy my time with you, Nerida.
And thank you for agreeing to be my first guest, because it is a little bit, there's a bit to learn with podcasting, and it's lovely to be able to do it with someone who is a friend and fun to hang out with, and will just go with the flow with whatever happens.
Sounds perfect. I guarantee you we'll have a blast today. Hopefully actually come up with something educational for people too.
Yes. I love talking with you, because I always learn something. So it's always a fascinating conversation. Before we start, I do have a question. I just want people to get a little bit of a sense of who you are for a person. So it's a would you rather. Would you rather ride a racehorse or a racing cow?
Oh, that's a great question. So ironically, I am probably most well known for riding a racing cow. I set the world record for the fastest mile under saddle. But, even earlier today in class, students were asking me about that, quite coincidental. And they said, well, how does it compare? And the answer is one is just a lot slower than the other. So, yeah. Give me a good racehorse any day, but riding a cow was a blast.
It was funny, years ago I was in Kentucky in a feed company's office, and it had a poster that literally said, "We don't race cows." I'm like, well, some people do.
Some people who lack a little intelligence do that. I actually think I had that poster somewhere in my office. Oh, I actually have a poster with a Hordes Dairyman, and it's a person riding a cow, and it says it's not even a horse race. Yeah, right behind my computer screen, which is why I'm standing up to look at it. Anyway,
If anyone wants to check it out, can they Google Brian Nielsen cow racing and they find a video? Or
I'm sure there will be some information on the web about that. Yes,
it is very funny to see.
it was called the Udder Race instead of the other race. It was the Udder. DER. So,
very funny. And you have quite an eclectic collection of animals in your backyard. Can you run us through a few of them?
Sure. Besides the horses, which are, of course, if you're in what we do, you have to have horses. But I also have a longhorn steer that Nerida has visited on one of her trips to the U.S. His name is Earl. And I have an American buffalo, a bison, and her name is Shinoa. And unlike the ones that you see in the fun videos where they're trying to gore people, she really likes to hang out with people. So not everybody can say they have a pet buffalo, but yep, may as well.
Oh, I so want to come and meet her. I'll have to come and meet her soon. And you may or may not have seen where this was going, but you used to have a rabbit.
Oh, this is dirty pool. Okay. So the story is we had a rabbit who was the most amazing rabbit. She was this great producer, produced the best babies. They were cute, adorable, fluffy, and all that stuff. And why Nerida brought this up is I confess that I probably owned this girl for at least a year or maybe longer before I realized she only had 3 legs. Now, Now, part of it is when she grew up, she was so fluffy, and I just thought she had one leg tucked up underneath her. And again, she had produced multiple litters. She was amazing. Now, I'm going to throw Nerida under the bus from the standpoint she came to visit. She saw this rabbit whose name was Star, and I asked her which leg is missing, and she got it
It
wrong.
was,
She
yeah.
couldn't tell whether it was
It
the right or left leg that was missing.
it was
So,
really hard to tell which leg she was missing, but it was a very hilarious moment when we were at ICEAT, the International Conference on Equine Exercise Physiology, and you fessed up that you had a rabbit with 3 legs and you didn't know that it had 3
yeah,
legs.
I have to admit, I have no idea when we bought her. I'm assuming she came that way. I just never noticed. So,
Uh,
okay, thanks for
okay.
bringing that up. Now we realize I have no qualifications to be talking about animals. So, yeah.
Oh,
All
dear.
right.
So moving on to your area of expertise, which is, of course, in equine exercise physiology and particularly in bone physiology.
Okay, Nerida, I'm going to stop for a second and explain some more about the cow thing. The whole deal is there was this race to find the world's fastest cow. I didn't own a cow at the time, but I was told it by the person who thought it was funny. I was like, well, I can beat some dairy farmer. I just need to get a cow. And I did. So I do have a little knowledge in this area, even if I can't tell if there's 3 or 4 legs on an animal. So,
You've got a good eye
okay,
for a fast cow.
there we go. Exactly. Righty.
See,
Now back to what you're saying.
what's your backstory in the space of bone health, Brian? Like, what drew you into that area of research?
So once well, the way I got into the racing industry, horse racing, and the way I got into it is I thought I was going to be riding reining horses, and in my junior year of college, I was out riding in our horse riding arena at the school university I went to. My horse professor rides up to me, says, "Brian, how much do you weigh?" I told him. He said, "Okay, this summer you're going to be breaking and galloping thoroughbred racehorses." I'm like, "All right." I knew nothing about racehorses. But apparently I was the right size.
Mhm.
And I happened to get hired by this amazing trainer who is very progressive in his way of thinking about injuries and stuff. And that year was 1989, and being out there galloping racehorses, we would always talk about buck shins, known as dorsal metacarpal disease, and the research that was going on at that time, and just how to prevent this very common problem. At that time, there was probably 70% of the 2-year-old thoroughbreds in the United States that bucked their shins.
Yeah.
And for those who are not familiar with this problem, think about shin splints in humans. Very similar problem. Um, so that was what kind of inspired it. Just being out there on the track, visiting with this trainer, Francisco Bravo. We'll give him a shout out. He's still training to this day, doing a great job. But it was his interest in the topic that inspired mine. And then I was fortunate enough to go on to Texas A&M University, gig 'em eggs, whoop, hullabaloo, knick, knick. Don't ask me what all those words means, but that's what you say when you go to Texas A&M. And was able to study equine exercise physiology, working this area of bone health for my master's and PhD. So
Mm.
happened to get connected with the right people. You never know how life will take you, what path you're going to take, and sometimes it works out.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's happy serendipity a lot of the time, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yes.
When I went to university, I'd spent so much time as a teenager on horses that when I went to university and started playing sports, I essentially got bucked shins. Like, it was so painful, and I used to come off it like I was playing soccer for a while, and I'd come off at halftime and put like Denkerub or the muscle burning um potions on my shins so that the burning would take the pain away so that I could run around for second half. But it was incredibly painful, and it must have been what it was.
I'm going to give you another one, jumping ahead in the story, but staying on the same track. When Lance Armstrong, who won the Tour de France 7 times, wait, let's look at the record books. I think he had all of them taken away because of blood doping.
Mm.
When he finished with cycling, and let's face reality, he was one of the best endurance athletes out there at the time. He decided he was going to train for and run in a marathon. And his time was 2 hours, 59 minutes, and like 43 seconds. So pretty decent, not comparable to, some of the true marathon runners that are elite. What was interesting about it, as I recalled, he had finished it with 2 broken legs. Okay, now that's huge exaggeration, but I'm thinking it was basically a very, very severe case of shin splints. And the thing is he said that there was, again, I'm just paraphrasing, but nothing he's experienced that has ever been that painful, but he just thought that was part of the process. Wait, no, running on broken legs is not part of the process. But what it tells you is you can be an elite athlete, but if you have not strengthened your bone is not strong. And so it's a perfect comparison as to what we're going to be talking about now. I mean, he was one of the best, obviously very fit, but when you bike, you are not pounding the pavement, you are not strengthening the bone. And he ended up with very, very severe cases of shin splints. Uh, I've been fortunate enough to not have had shin splints, so I can't tell for certain what it's like. I have had stress fractures, which is effectively what it is. But yeah, and I have to sympathize with our horses, like the fact that they may be dealing with this stuff. We need to find ways to prevent it, and we kind of have.
Yeah, yeah, and I was going to say, like from a welfare perspective, it is incredibly important to get this stuff sorted because it is so painful,
Yes.
for us and also for them. So, just on that note, was there any particular horse that inspired this journey in your life?
I'll go back to that first trainer I was riding for, the first thoroughbred trainer I was riding for. A- a- Again, how things happened to turn out. He had brought in a horse to be started under saddle. He said, take it out to the round pen, chase it around a little bit, and then I'll come help you put a saddle on it. I finished chasing the horse around. Then he comes out there and he's like, okay, would you like to hold it or would you like to put the saddle on? I said, well, actually, I'd prefer to do it both on myself. He's like, huh, okay. If you could do it, I'll be impressed. If not, I'll be disappointed in you. Did that. And then he says, so I suppose you want to ride him now too. And I'm like, yes, I would. So I rode that horse, um, went really smooth. And then he brought out another one for me to do the same in. And what I did is I went from an exercise rider who galloped maybe one or two horses a day, mainly clean stalls, to the head exercise rider at that facility that year. Just that one horse giving me that big introduction. Um, hold a very special fondness to that horse. And the way it ties in here is after that summer was done, that horse was sent off to Remington Park racetrack in Oklahoma City. And I did not watch the race. You didn't have it televised this way. Um, but he broke his leg off so close to the finish line that the jockey ended up on the other side of the finish line and the horse did not finish. Um, and to me, this was the horse that gave me my big break. And sadly, that horse lost his life.
Mm.
And that kind of inspired this whole we need to find ways to prevent these horses from having those types of injuries.
Yeah, well.
And that was that first really personal loss that
Mm.
I felt. So
I didn't know that story, but what a way, what a motivation to make things better for the horses.
along that same line, at that time, there was a special new type of racetrack surface. I believe it was called Equitrack,
Hmm.
and it was a polymer coated sand. And it was supposed to be oh, this is going to prevent all these injuries. And everybody was saying it was the latest and greatest, preventer. And that horse died on that track.
Mm.
And so in recent years, not so recent anymore, but we've had all these new artificial surfaces that were supposed to do the same, prevent all these injuries. I said to myself, it's like, yeah, I remember hearing that story back in 1990 and it didn't work. Racetrack surface that they were trying out back then, it's no longer available. It's like, let's hold off and make judgments later on after we see what really happens. And all the injuries are not caused by racetrack surfaces. It's what we do with the horses that tend to cause the injuries. And
Mm.
so it that horse has held special meaning to me in a couple of different ways. Just sometimes a little experience and knowing what's happened in the past can prevent you from making the same problems or causing the same problems in the future. So,
Mm. So I think with the next question I wanted to ask you, I think you've answered the second part of it, which is why is it important that we all collectively shift our thinking in this space of horse management? I mean, you've just given us a really good example. Like there's horses that break their legs, which is of course the most catastrophic result. But there's a lot of horses that careers just end as well. But my question is, what is the biggest misconception horse owners and trainers have about bone health? Without giving us the answer yet.
okay, I I would say I'm going to give you two.
Hmm.
I'm breaking the rules. One is that we should wait until they're skeletally mature to do anything with them. And the other is that really long distance, slow exercise makes bone stronger. So I'm cheating, I'm giving you two, but I would say those are the biggies. One, that you should wait until they're skeletally mature to do anything with them, in terms of exercise. And two is that slow work builds bone.
Yeah, yeah, that long, slow work that we all think of as being so good for them. So, um, before we go further into talking about bone health, in simple terms, could you please explain what bone modeling and bone remodeling are?
Sure. I'm going to start with remodeling because that's what most people talk about.
Mm.
You always hear horse people, veterinarians, scientists who know a little bit about bone, but not much. We always hear them talk about bone remodeling. And in essence, they're talking about bone fixing itself and repairing itself, and taking away mineral, adding new mineral back in. I like to do the comparison of fixing a road. So if you have a pothole or a damaged little bit of asphalt on a road, remodeling is taking away that damaged stuff, putting in some new asphalt, just patching the road. You have not made the road bigger, stronger, anything like that. You just have fixed that pothole. That's remodeling, and that can occur throughout the whole horse's life, throughout its entire life. But when I hear people who only have limited knowledge about bone, they always talk about bone remodeling and they think it's this catch-all term.
Mm.
However, what I like to focus on, particularly because very few people talk about it, is bone modeling.
Hmm.
This primarily occurs during bone growth, when that animal is young and growing, and it is the process where the bone changes shape. Um, it changes its strength. It can make it weaker. It can make it stronger. We of course hope it becomes stronger. Um, and you can make it larger. You can make it thinner. You can make it wider. If you think about a horse going from the embryo through fetus through full yearling, up 2 year old, 3 year, these changes that are happening in the bone, that's bone modeling. Now, let's go back to our road analogy. When you are building a road, you have the option to make it a little gravel road in the country,
Hmm.
a 2-lane road in the city, a 4-lane highway, a 6-lane highway, a super highway. It is so much easier to do that when you are building it. It's a lot tougher to take that road that's been in the city and make it bigger once it already exists.
Yeah.
So while that animal is growing, that's when bone modeling occurs. That's when you have the opportunity to make it bigger or stronger. Or if you fail, you can make it weaker also.
Hmm.
And then your question might be, well, why would you want bone to become weaker? Hopefully, I'm not stealing a question you were thinking like, I'm going to ask him later about this. But if you think about it, um, evolution is such to ensure survival. And if you are an animal that gets eaten like a horse, we could put a leg the size of a draft horse on a racehorse. That leg's probably never going to break, but it's a bad idea because the horse is going to be slow. And we're thinking, yeah,
Yeah.
that doesn't help a racehorse.
Uh-huh.
Mother Nature doesn't care about a racehorse, but she doesn't want this horse to get eaten.
Yeah.
And the heavier that leg is, the slower it's going to be. Might be like a race cow, and increase the likelihood of getting eaten. Now, likewise, if you think of our predators, they want to survive. Mother Nature's created them to try and survive, and their job is to outrun the animal that they want to eat. And again, you could make their bones really super heavy and less likely to break, but then they're going to starve to death because they
Mm.
can't run their animal.
Yeah.
And like cheetah, you will never see a cheetah pick a fight with a lion because cheetahs actually have weak bones because they have to be lightweight
Right.
in order to run fast.
Yeah.
And so that's what Mother Nature says. Make the bone as strong as you need, but don't carry any extra around because that's a waste of energy.
Yeah, yeah.
And,
Evolution
and you're
is
not going to.
so clever, isn't it? How it,
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
just allows they're
Yeah.
constantly adapting to their environment. And I guess it's like with the weight thing, it'd be like lining up in a 100-meter sprint race in a pair of gumboots.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
like just that
You're
extra
not going to
weight.
win.
There is no way you're
Yes.
going to win. Yeah, yeah.
Unless
So,
you're Usain Bolt, he might be able to do that. But
yeah, Usain Bolt at a school, well, any almost.
you're right. Exactly.
Yeah, when you're incredibly talented and have trained so hard, then yeah, you can
We'll
probably
grant
win
the
a race.
exception.
Yeah.
But yeah, for the rest of us, it is a major impediment to doing well.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. So you set out on this bone research journey, having had the motivation of seeing that something absolutely needed to change, and you started in your first lot of research. You found that horses actually lost bone density when they started training. So it's probably a bit of a leading question, but what did you expect to see when these horses went into training?
Well, I want to go back to that evening. I think it was January of 1991. I was in the lab at Texas A&M. I might be off a little bit, but that's what sticks in my mind as to the maybe in 19 whatever, it doesn't matter. But I remember being in the lab. We had taken lots of x-rays, radiographs, tracking what happened to the bone of, I had 53 quarter horses in race training.
Hmm.
And I was expecting, these are like, they started the project when long yearlings, early 2-year-olds, and I'm expecting bone mass to go up because they're growing horses. However, I'm looking at it, and from the time they entered the study and we started to, I always use the word breaking, and I know that's a bad term because it implies a negative thing, but everybody knows what I'm talking about. It's getting the horse accustomed to the saddle and rider. And the way to do it, trust me, it's not breaking, it's just putting a ride on them. But anyway, so from that start of training, when we started to getting them used to being ridden, um, until they had completed a total of 9 races, we saw this big drop. It started out and it went down, and then it started to go back up again. It never got, by the time these horses had raced 9 times, it never had gone up to the same level it was before they started training. And I just remember being in the lab, I'd run the statistics on this, and I'm like, well, I screwed up, because I'm thinking that doesn't make any sense. If you think about muscle, you train it, it gets stronger. The
Mm.
cardiovascular system, the respiratory system, you put it in training, it stronger. Why is bone decreasing in mass, bone strength? So I figure, well, no chance I'll ever get a degree because I really got up.
When you realized that you hadn't messed your data up, what were some of the early theories on why the bone loss was occurring?
Well, I went back. We had radiographs taken 90 days before the start of the study, and I analyzed those just to see. And from 90 days out to when they started the study, it went up. Again, it made sense.
Yeah.
But then what we started to think is, bone remodeling. Because this is 1990, 1991, and all anybody ever talked about was bone remodeling. And our working hypothesis was, well, you take away bone because it wasn't strong enough for training. Um, and then you add it back in to make it stronger because that's what everybody says. You take it away, you add it in, and it made sense. And so that was our thought is, wow, maybe the bone isn't strong enough. You need a new site to add new bone on, so you have to lose mineral to add it back on.
Hmm.
That was cute. That was 1990. That was 1991. That was cute. Um,
So now
yeah.
what was actually happening.
Well, I want to give uh, applause to a person on my PhD committee, Dr. Sue Bloomfield. Um, but I'm because she didn't know anything about horses. And that was a very important thing. Um, I happened to go to a seminar that was being given on the Texas A&M campus by one of the world's leading equine bone researcher. He was a guy that, as an exercise rider, we were discussing his research, my trainer and I. So he was like an idol of mine.
Hmm.
He'd given a seminar down there, and I was walking back with him after a seminar, little grad student, and asking him, I'm like, do you think maybe it's that we're putting horses in stalls? and that's why we're having all these injuries because we're not stressing the bone enough. He said, ah, no, that's not it. Horses out on pasture don't run enough to make a difference. I was like, alrighty, thank you. I figure I'm the peon grad student. Someday I'm going to look into this. Um, but Sue Bloomfield on my PhD committee, she is a world expert on human bed rest patients. For
Mm.
instance, people who have been paralyzed. Um, and I posed this question to her, like, do you think sticking them in stalls is what's causing the issues? And she goes, of course it is. That totally makes sense. Now, she wasn't biased by what we've done forever with horses, because again, she was there for my PhD research where I had a number of horses I had to break to put them into training. She didn't realize you had to quote unquote break horses to ride them. She thought you could just go out to any pasture, throw a saddle on a horse, and ride it. And that was beautiful because so many times we get so used to how it's always been done in the horse
Yep.
industry that we're blinded to reality.
Yep.
Where here's an expert in bone. She wasn't blinded to reality because she doesn't know what we do with horses, but she realized what we were doing with horses is probably not in the best interest of bone.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing what you can see when you look at something with fresh eyes or through someone else's
Yes.
eyes? Yeah. Because you,
Such an important thing to do sometimes.
yeah, especially in science, because we can convince ourselves really any way we want to be convinced sometimes. So that's, yeah. Wow. How again, serendipity.
Yes, exactly. I
Uh,
look at my career and how many of those serendipitous moments there have been that you think about what path you could have taken if things were just a little different. I've
yeah,
been
yeah.
blessed.
So
So,
talk us through it. So stabling or confinement of horses reduces bone mass, but can you talk us, or bone density? Am I using the right terminology?
uh, I, I would always go bone mass because it's hard to separate out density versus actual volume. Because you can have a bone that's the exact same size, but it's a little bit more denser. That's probably stronger. You can take a bone that has the same density, but make it bigger, and that also will make it stronger. So I wimp out and I talk bone mass or the amount of mineral content that's there because it takes into account volume as well as density.
Yeah.
Um, so what was your question?
So talk us through how confinement
Oh, yes.
reduces bone mass.
So simply put, there is what people in bone refer to as Wolff's Law. Wolff's Law simply says that bone adapts to whatever forces are placed upon it. And so a simple way to put it is use it or lose it. And so you put them into a stall and they don't have an opportunity to sprint at all. Bone responds to loading much more than it does cycles. So how much force you put on that bone versus how many strides you take. Uh, we can talk about it more later, but lots of long, slow work doesn't do anything to make bone stronger. By the way, just in case we don't talk about it later, I think that stuff is wonderful for a horse's mind. I am not criticizing it. I do a lot of long, slow stuff, trail rides with my race horses. I believe in that stuff, but I guarantee you it does not make bone stronger. Speed or high load strides are what makes bone stronger. And the beautiful thing is, it does not take much of that at all to get bone to be strong. Bone responds much more to the intensity of the load than to how many loading cycles you have. Uh, so, a short sprint of 50 yards, 50 meters accomplishes way more than 20 miles of slow work. Miles of slow work does nothing in terms of making bone stronger. In fact, it might actually make horses less likely to play and run fast on their own,
Uh,
which you might actually make it weaker because they aren't loading it.
yeah, yeah.
So,
It feels counterintuitive, and I think this is where if anyone is listening to this and resisting it, it does feel counterintuitive that 20 miles of long slow work does less for bone strength than a sprint of 50 meters.
right. We did a research project. I think it was published. I'm making this up, what, like 2008 or something like that, where we had a group of 2-year-old Arabians in simulated endurance work. They were to complete a 60-kilometer simulated endurance ride on a high-speed treadmill every 3 weeks. So think how fit you have to have these horses that every 3 weeks they can do a 60-kilometer exercise bout. Um, we looked at their bone mass at the beginning of the study, and by bone mass, I'm talking about looking at the cross-sectional area of the third metacarpal bone, the cannon bone, just to look at bone mineral content. So we looked at that at the beginning of the study and then at the end of the study, and we compared it to pasture mates. Same age, horses that were raised together. We just didn't need them on the research project. But, our endurance trained horses at night, they'd get thrown out on the pasture with these others. And there was no difference between bone mass between those in that heavy duty endurance training and those that weren't. And if you look at the graphs, and I'm about to do something that I chide people who do it, usually they do it for other reasons. I'm going to emphasize again, there was no difference between groups, but looking at the graphs, it looked like the ones that were endurance training were losing bone mass, and it looked like the ones not in endurance training were increasing bone mass. If you had more horses, if you kept the study longer, it would not have surprised me if we actually saw that, because I've done 4 marathons, and when I'm training for a marathon, I'm chronically tired. Do I feel like running around and playing? No. And these horses, when they got turned loose, they would go eat, drink, and sleep.
Sleep. Yeah.
Their pasture mates, they didn't run around very much. That really respected equine bone researcher, again, I think highly of him. He was right. They don't run around much.
Yeah.
But they don't eat much. If they just sprint a little bit, that's all it takes.
Yeah, yeah. So what he was missing was the fact, and what everyone missed, including you guys, until you did the cool research that showed it, was that it really doesn't take much sprinting at all. So the pasture horses, I watch my horses all the time, and they really don't gallop a lot. But the little bit that they do, it's enough.
Yes. Well, what I began to realize, I think it was 2004 that I quit putting any potential racehorse that I had in training in stalls. The horse that kind of broke this model for me is I was planning to keep him out on pasture most of the time, but I was going to stall hop him for a few days before a race, meaning you put him in the stall, let him build up his energy, become big and bad. He was a racing quarter horse, and I'm like, save up all that energy. And I remember at dinner that night, after I'd put him in the stall, watching him, had those Dutch doors, the half doors, and it was a case of where I'm looking at him, and he is just rocking back and forth in there, and I can tell, he's not happy. And I've never had to depend on my horses to feed my family. So I do this because, I love it, and I love my horses. So 1, he's not happy. 2, he's not resting, which is what the whole goal was. And 3, he may injure himself. So I turned him out, and that was the last time I ever put a horse in a stall that I have in training. And I'm blessed. I have my own property. I don't have that many horses in training. I can do things not your average person can do. But I remember later on realizing, as I'm like going out in the evening, whatever, I call my horses, they come running up. And I'm thinking, twice a day, these horses are running more than they would run in a week. When you're working them under saddle. And I remember, like, as an exercise rider for a trainer, you put the speed on the horse, you work them, and the next day you come in and you ask the trainer, so how'd they pull up? I'm thinking, because you were worried about them being injured. By contrast, I never worried about them running. Okay, let's call it like it is. I was going to say horses are stupid. I try to teach my students they're not stupid, they're instinctual. But we'll call it like it is. Horses are stupid, and might they run into a tree or something? Horses find a way to hurt themselves. So I'm not saying they will never get injured. And I think that's a problem we have as horse owners. We are so worried about them getting injured that we predispose them to injury. We set them up to get injured. But like, I never worried about them running hard and then pulling up lame because they ran hard. By contrast, when we kept them stall confined and you put the occasional burst of speed on, you were really worried the next day. Did they injure themselves putting that speed on?
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, I guess you don't have to worry about it when you know that their bones are adapted for it and
Yeah,
they're strong enough to handle that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talk us through the bending of the bone, because it's the bending, isn't it? So when they're exercising at speed, the bones actually bend, and that's what signals the bone
Yes.
to strengthen.
Yep, exactly. So, this theory was proposed, I think, in the 80s. Uh, Rubin and Lanyon, I believe, if anybody wants to search those papers up, where they talked about the optimal strain environment. And what that means is bone wants to bend a little, not too much. If bone bends too much, that's a signal for the bone that you are too weak, you need to become stronger, and bone becomes stronger. If you don't bend enough, such as when a horse is stuck in a stall, then the bone says, "Oh, you're too strong. Let's get rid of some of that mineral." Because it's always trying to add or take away bone so that you carry as much bone mineral as you need, but not so much that it's a burden that you're going to get eaten. Again, you can make bone that'll never break, but you might get eaten in the process, and that's a losing proposition. So it wants to bend. If it bends too much, that's a signal for bone to become stronger. If it doesn't bend, it's a signal for the bone to take mineral away.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
It makes a lot of sense to me as a nutritionist that another reason why it takes mineral away is that the skeleton is heavy. And if they're
yeah,
carrying around way more bone than what they need to, then it burns up a lot of energy. And when horses were evolving, so over their 55 million year evolution, they didn't have humans to be feeding them all of the feed that we feed them these days. They were reliant on what they could find, and often it was slim pickings a lot of the time. So they had to be as efficient as they could be with their energy. So carrying around a lot more mineral than they needed in their bone just didn't make any sense.
yeah, totally. I mean, like you said, skeleton is heavy and don't carry any more than you need. And uh, and the problem we get into then is once we've created a weakened skeleton, um, then you have the situation where it takes a while to build that back up.
Mm.
Uh, and so let's think of our typical race horse.
Can I stop you for a second? I really want to go there because that's my massive question: is how do we bring them back? Like if we've had them, I think that's where you're going. I want to get there, but can you just talk us through, because you've done so many cool studies, including the ones with calves, which are the ones that's probably the one that blew my mind the most. Can you just pick out a few of the studies that you've done over the years and talk us through how, because you've seen this effect over and over again. If you stall a
Yeah.
horse or confine a horse and don't give it access to high speed exercise, they will lose bone mass.
I'm glad you asked it because, yeah, I'll run through a series of one. Probably the ones that I would say best put into easy, understandable terms of how we can mess things up or how we can improve them. And the first project that I did here at Michigan State University in 1996, we started it, was to address this issue regarding uh, stalling versus pasture. We had a group of long yearlings, been raised together. We randomly assigned half of them to stalls, half of them out on pasture. The one in stalls, we walked an hour a day on a mechanical walker. So they were getting some exercise.
Hmm.
Uh, and we did that for 3 months. And then the graduate student I had, she was like, "I really like more horse experience. Would it be okay if we broke these?" And I'm like, "Yes, that's what we do. I love doing that." I got permission to break them. So we had 3 day, let's try it again, 3 months of just stall versus pasture. And then we added on in the last 2 months where we actually introduced them into training for 2 months. And it was your typical walk, trot, slow canter, like what we would see in the racehorse industry. We took a bunch of measurements, but what I want to focus on is these radiographic measurements, like the bone mineral content. The horses out on pasture, it just went up, gradually went up. You would expect that. Long yearlings, 2-year-olds, they're growing. You would expect it to increase. The ones we stuck into stalls, they immediately saw a decrease in bone mass, despite being walked an hour per day on a mechanical walker. And even when we entered them into training after 3 months, it still did not go up. After 5 months, their bone mass was lower than when we first touched them
Oh
5 months
wow.
prior. And and that perfect segue because that's what I see in the racehorse industry. You have people that will often sale prep their horses, They want to keep them stalled so they look pretty. They aren't sun bleached. They don't have scars on them. Um, and they do that for a period of time, maybe get hand walked. And then when they enter training, about the only time you have any speed on them is when things get out of control there by accident. But typically it's a few months of slow stuff. So during that period of time, you've lost bone mass and it's low. And then at some point in training, you're like, okay, now they're ready for speed because cardiovascular, they're fit and all that stuff. And we start to put speed on them, working them, and then they develop buck shins, uh, or worse.
Worse,
Uh,
yeah.
and that's it, is these horses that are handled with kid gloves and not allowed to sprint at all, they have weakened bone. We'll come back to how we handle that in a bit. Want to run through a few more studies. We did one with weanlings. We said, okay, we know that if we stick them in stalls 24 hours a day, minus 1 hour out, um, that causes problems. What about half in, half out? And so we had a study where, yeah, it was 24 hours in stalls, 24 hours of out of stalls, half the day in, half the day out. And we kept those three treatment groups for 2 months. Um, and in that case, the stalled ones lower bone mass compared to the other two groups. So we realized, okay, partial turnout was adequate. What was really cool is after that project ended, and again, these horses were weanlings. We went back a year later. All the horses have been tossed out to pasture. You could not separate those out. I was so happy to see that they had that ability to regain bone mass. You know, if they'd been kept that way until they were adult, I can't guarantee that, but
Mhm.
that was a neat little thing.
Sorry, can I interrupt there? With the so you couldn't tell the difference after you'd put them all back out on pasture. Were you able to have a look at the shape of their bone? Was the shape of the bone, because we talked early on about bone modeling and, are we building an 8-lane highway or a gravel road?
Sure.
Was the modeling the same?
We weren't able with the techniques we used, because this work was published like in 1999, I think. We weren't at that point where we could do that. And I would guess, given that the original project ended, it was only 2 months long, and it ended when they were, I don't know, probably 6, 7 months old. And then we went a year. They're still growing and those changes can still happen. And so if you're putting the forces on there, I'm going to guess the bone is going to like, okay, let's fix up this little wreck that we've been having going on. Well, I'm going to guess, and especially looking at the averages for their bone mineral content, they were so identical. It was kind of amazing. The graph of it's really neat how after a year they had totally recovered it. So I think they would have been fine. If we had kept those treatments in post for 6 months, 8 months, when they are past some of that peak growth stuff, I
Mm.
don't know that I would be as confident
Mhm.
about it.
Mhm.
Now, I want to talk about the calf studies. The next big study that we did this both with calves and with weanling horses, where we've been comparing pasture versus stalls, and there are so many other confounding factors: sunshine, what they're eating, et cetera, et cetera. We decided to isolate it to just exercise being the difference. And both with calves and horses, we had, again, three treatment groups, kind of a group house paddock type thing where they could move around, but probably not run around a lot. Um, Pure confinement, like horses stuck in stalls with no exercise, calves stuck in what would be similar to a calf hutch, so a very small little area where they couldn't exercise, as well as that confinement with exercise. And with both horses and calves, with the horses, I think it was like 81 meters. Maybe they were sprinting 5 days per week for 2 months. With the calves, it was like 50 some meters once per day, 5 times per week for 6 months. Big difference. With the little sprint, even with confinement houses, the little sprint producing big differences. Looking at one reason we've done some calf work, these were juvenile bull calves that were destined for the food chain anyway. So we were able to actually do that and then harvest the legs so we could actually do bone breaking of the legs. Because it's nice that we're seeing these changes with bone mass and mineral content and all that. But to connect the dots and say, yes, this actually made the bone stronger, that is what was missing, but we could do that with the calves. And we improved by, 1 sprint per day, 50 meters, for again 6 weeks. Like 20 some percent difference in bone breaking strength.
Wow.
But hold it, we're not finished.
Here comes the good bit.
This is even more
Because
amazing.
because people right now are going, "You mean I have to sprint my young horses 5 days a week?" But keep listening, he's getting to the good stuff.
So yeah, because I felt at that time that it's like, okay, we're good. We know the answer. Like, yeah, just a little sprint, 50 meters. It's not a big deal. But there still was the question, okay, yeah, do you need to do that 5 days per week?
Mm.
And you could bring up the question about, okay, if I'm at a racetrack and I'm riding, do I have to do it 5 days per week, put speed on them? Or do I need to have them turned out? Some things that are just not practical for everybody. So we changed it up. And again, we had the control group, no sprint exercise, 1 day per week, 3 days per week, or 5 days per week for these calves. I think the sprint was, I'm trying to recall exactly how many meters it was. I could do some quick math, but that would involve math. But somewhere in the 50, 60 meter thing.
Yeah, it was short. Yeah.
Here, what was cool for 6 weeks, 1 sprint per week of that 50, 60 meter thing compared to no exercise produced I think it was a 27 or 29% difference in bone breaking strength. No difference between 1 time per week, 3 times per week, or 5 times per week. I'm going to put that even into more perspective. For those of us who ever run on your high school track or a college track, usually those are about a quarter of a mile, 440 yards or 400 meters. If you combine all the sprinting those calves that sprinted once per week for a month and a half, they would make it like 1 time around the track. That's how little high-speed exercise is needed
Mm.
for bone loss. That's mind-blowing.
Mhm.
And then the question is on the practical standpoint, how do you do that? Well, I can give you some guidance, but I also sometimes provide people with the knowledge and then let them figure out the puzzle. So with like racehorses, I will often, um, n- n- maybe not every time I ride them, but I'll do just a little quick spurt. I'll just gun them, and then by the time they reach full speed, I'm pulling them up. They never get speed crazy, and they never injure themselves. You know, horses often get speed crazy when you do too much speed, and particularly what people don't realize is speed crazy horses often do that because they're not enjoying it. Some of the best or most successful racehorses I've ever ridden have been lazy. They're not stressed over their work. They join it. They never get speed crazy. They know when it's time to run and they do it. And the thing is if you can keep it those short little bursts of speed, it allows you to do that exercise and keep the horse's mind under control, because that
Mm.
is the other.
Mhm. Yep.
The other option, if you have it, is if you can have a turnout for them. But I will admit, here's where I'll tell you the situation and you figure it out. I was over in Dubai, over in the United Arab Emirates. I don't recall what year, but 15 years ago or so, to give some talks. And I'm at this one farm, and there is a racehorse trainer that I'm visiting with, and he's like, I get it. I've heard this type of stuff before, but I didn't fully understand it. I get it now. But here's the question. And right then, a groom is leading a horse by, and he's like, so that's a $300,000 horse, and he's been handled incorrectly. Um, I was there in December. That horse had arrived in October, and that horse hadn't been out of a stall other than, just some slow work. He's like, how do I fix that now that I realize I have a problem?
Yeah, and this is my massive question too, Brian, because as you
Yeah.
know, I work with a lot of racehorses that this is their exact situation. They're in long, slow work for months. And then
Yes.
how do you get them from if that's the situation they're in, how do you get them from there to being able to handle sprint work without breaking down or
Right.
breaking something?
One, if you have the proper facilities to go ahead and allow horse turnout on their own, great. However, horses like to kill themselves. So that's why I say proper facilities, because most people don't have proper facilities. And when we do this silly thing of confining horses and then turn them loose, then they run around like idiots and hurt themselves. So If you never confine them, then you never have that problem. Like my horses, they run, but they know where everything is. Okay, so that's not practical because that's not what most people are faced with. What you need to realize is you have created bone that's weak. Might be intentionally, but it's weak. You can build the strength back up, but it's going to take time. And you need to listen to your horses. Horses will usually give you clues if you're willing to listen to them when their behavior changes because they're beginning to feel some pain and things like that. We often try to hide pain or we get after our horses if they're not behaving. And it's like, no, no, no. They're just trying to talk to you. Why don't you listen to them? Um, but what you need to do is plan on it taking a lot of time, gradually increasing the speed. Um, and by gradually, I don't mean actually building up how fast you go. I'm speaking build up how far you go fast. So if you do just little bursts of speed for a long time, that bone will get stronger and you're not creating damage at the same time.
Yeah, yeah.
It's where you start out and it's like, okay, we start to, work them 3 furlongs, 3/8 of a mile. And we do that a couple times. Then we work them a half mile. But you're working them on legs that are weak and you're accumulating damage and you're not allowing enough time for it to get fixed. So if you've messed them up, you have to allow more time to get it fixed, but you need to actively be working on that by introducing little bouts of speed. And I'm thinking 50 to 100 meters. And do those a couple of times a week. You're not creating damage and you're adapting the bone, but it might take you a few months where you can actually go ahead. I look at myself. I'm facing that same thing now as an old person. And my training has sucked. And Michigan State University used to be the best place for me to train. I could use their indoor track and their outdoor track. And a couple of years ago, they banned us from doing that. And so now I've gone through winter and I've not been able to train how I normally would have trained. And I have a race coming up in a couple of months. And I'm like, okay, I'm really having to balance that now because if I worked as hard as I wanted to, I know I would cripple myself. Uh, so you have to slow it down a little bit.
So with the horses that have been, confined and in song work for potentially months, sometimes in the case of horses that I've worked with, it could be 6, 7 months or more sometimes. If when they do start sprinting them, so the sprint will bend their bone, which is like a gentle tap on the shoulder to the skeleton to go, hey, you need to be stronger, right? So, and it doesn't
Yes.
take many of those bends to get the message through to the skeleton, is what you're
Correct.
saying.
Yes.
So with
And
this,
real quickly, well, hold on. I'm going to stop you for in other animal species from poultry, it was either roosters or turkeys to mice. They're showing anywhere from like 4 to 19 bends
yeah,
is
wow,
all it needs. It's not much. And I
yeah.
look at our calves, 50 meters and things like that. So
Hmm.
again, it's not keep
Hmm.
going.
So with these horses that have been confined for a long time in slow work, their skeleton is going to be quite weak. When they do start that sprinting, would it also make sense? And I'm asking this for my knowledge because I need to know how to deal with these horses. But would it also make sense to slowly build up the speed, like not go? And I know in a 50-meter sprint, you're not going to be able to get to full speed. So, is that part of it? In keeping those sprints really short, you're also not going to reach like maximum speed, and then you build up the
Yeah,
distance, and therefore you're also building up the maximum speed that you'd reach.
you bet. No, that totally makes sense. And let's just say you could go full speed for 2 strides.
Mhm. Yeah.
You're fine.
Yep.
But you're right, you're building up to it, and then you're bringing it down, and so you rarely would want to go full speed for any length of time. Um, but you're right, as you're teaching that horse to go fast under saddle, um, there are some that really know how to go really fast right from the very beginnings. Wow, my screen is just all kinds of
You
exciting
just
thing.
You just said something really good because you got fireworks, and I don't know why.
Yeah. And I was thinking of that. I was thinking of a racehorse I used to ride that the first time taking him from the starting gates, I mean, it was bam,
But
like, and I was before I could pull up the horse. So it knew what I was thinking.
it did.
And I was like, man, I've never experienced that on a horse
Uh,
before that absolutely knew how to. Anyway, uh, the deal is you're right. You're going to gradually build up on how fast you go and how many of those fast rides you put together. Um, I guess the biggest cautionary tale is what people traditionally have been doing, and they still do, and they were doing it back, when I was an exercise rider in the late 80s, early 90s, where you're just doing slow, slow, slow. Already, we got 2 or 3 months under our belt of nothing but slow. Now we're going to start putting the speed on. And it happens for a few weeks, and then your horse is injured.
mhm.
That happens so many times. We're going to introduce a little burst of speed once, twice a week, whatever, just little ones. As soon as you mentally have that horse capable of being controlled and no issues, just introduce that. And they do handle it really good. Obviously, probably not gonna happen the very first ride under a saddle. Um, but, once you get to that point where you feel comfortable just giving a little sprint, do it. And keep those going, and it will gradually build up, and you will be fine. And if you haven't had a horse that's had that done, still do the same thing. Little bursts and just build up, and it may take a few months. I will go ahead and mention regarding shin splints, a study that I read many years ago, so I don't recall the specifics. One way to prevent shin splints in humans is like before you enter athletic training for I don't recall now, month or two ahead of time is, jump off a chair 10 times. Because what it does, you land on the floor, and now I'm getting thumbs up in the Zoom thing. Cool, whatever. Uh, I love things that are smarter than me. But anyway, I actually think a better thing is just do a short little sprint a few times as a human. The reason humans tend to develop shin splints, and I thought your example was perfect, and I want to go back to it. You were riding, you were probably fit,
Mm,
but you had not been pounding the pavement with
mm-mm.
your leg.
No, no, I
And
didn't run.
and that's normal in middle school, high school. Often you aren't training, and then that sports season comes, and then it's time to train. And when you do that, you do it for a while, you're getting a little fit, and suddenly you're developing shin sprints. Whereas if a few months ahead of time, you did a short little sprint, 2 or 3 times a week, the odds of developing shin splints once you really enter training would go down dramatically. And that's what we're
Mm,
talking,
mm-mm.
whether it's horses, whether it's humans, we can prevent all this stuff. It's
Mm.
pretty
There was a really cool research study done. I'm pretty sure it was in Australia in prostate cancer patients, and looking at the effect of some of the drugs that they use must knock out testosterone largely for at least for a while, and their bone density, the men's bone density, will drop quite dramatically. And this study had the little hurdles that they use at kids like athletics when kids are like tiny tots, and they have these tiny
like
little
my side.
hurdles. They'd be like 20 centimeters, maybe 30 centimeters high.
Yeah.
And what this study did was with half the men, they got them to do a 2-footed jump over one of those hurdles. So they would take off with 2 feet, land on 2 feet. So they were hitting the ground quite hard. And then the other men just exercised as normal. I think they both both groups maybe walked, and the group that were jumping the hurdles didn't lose bone density, whereas the other group did.
That is so cool, and it makes sense. If you understand bone physiology, it totally makes
Mm.
sense.
Hey, just dropping in for a tiny moment. If feeding your horse feels messy or confusing, there is an easier way. The My Happy Horse app takes you from guessing to confident in minutes, so you know exactly what your horse needs every day. Think of it as your pocket-sized nutrition genie. Find it at myhappy.horse or on the App Store. All right, back to the show. So going back to the two misconceptions that you mentioned at the beginning, so that we shouldn't do anything with horses until their skeleton's fully mature, particularly that one. What happens in that situation when we do baby these young horses, and particularly if they're confined? So young horses I'm assuming out in big pastures that can run around. So, my babies, and in fact, every time I saw Domino and Dillinger sprinting flat out past, I'd go, "Oh, Brian, I'll be so happy with you two today. Well done on your bone density exercise." Literally, that's what I would think when I saw them galloping. But what happens when we baby those young horses like that and don't work them until their skeleton is mature?
So first of all, I love summer months when we have our windows open and I hear my horses running out at pasture in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And I know there are people that'd be like panicking because their horses are going to get injured. And I'm thinking, no, they're making their bones strong. This is great stuff. Um, so the deal is those horses that have been babied, that don't get to run around, they are impairing bone development at that most critical time. If you never get a chance or allow that young horse to sprint or play, um, or do it under saddle, you miss that time of their life when they can make bones stronger. And it's funny how so many people in the horse industry have embraced this idea that you should wait until the horse is skeletally mature to start training. Um, Researchers from all over the world that study this in horses, and whether they're studying cartilage or tendon or bone, all have come to the same conclusion that no, training while young is actually not a bad thing. And in fact, it might be good because that is when these tissues have the greatest ability to adapt to stressors. Um, I always like to use the analogy like, okay, so if we aren't supposed to train when you're young and growing, supposed to wait till skeletally mature, then if we want to be a great Olympian, we should wait to start training until we're about 23 years old.
Mm.
That makes no sense when you put it in those terms.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've lost that ability for bone to adapt. The only time bone can really become strongest is when it's stimulated while it's growing. Now, I'm a big fan of like out on pasture on their own. They're doing a lot of the great stuff on their own. But if you don't provide that, you're probably making some mistakes.
Because that's when the bone modeling, so versus remodeling, that's the only time that bone modeling can occur, right? And I think
Yeah,
one of the coolest things out of the calf study is actually being able to see the cross section of their cannon bone. And the difference in the shape is phenomenal. So the calves that sprinted once per week versus the calves that didn't sprint at all, it's so different. And visibly, you can see that the ones that sprinted would have much stronger bone.
there's that old saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words. When I'm out there visiting with trainers, I love to show that picture because the ones that weren't sprinted, you look at the cortical thickness, it's thin. The ones that had the little sprinting, it's thick. I mean, statistics, we don't need no statistics. You can just look at it and see the difference. And I don't know how a person can argue against it.
Mm.
Um,
And potentially for those young horses that if they don't get a lot of exercise when they're well, not a lot of exercise, but if they don't have access to turnout or some very short periods of high speed exercise, then potentially that's what's going to happen is that their bones will mature in that much weaker structure
right,
and shape.
exactly. Now, I'm going to throw out something that's worth considering. So, there's even epidemiological studies that show horses that you wait until they're 3, 4, 5 years old to start racing have more injuries than ones that start racing when they're 2-year-olds. There's all kinds of evidence that shows this. The individuals who opt to wait until their horse is skeletally mature, even though they are probably not doing what's actually scientifically proven to be best for bone, one reason they may get away with it is if you are patient enough to wait until your horse is 5 to do anything with your horse, if there are problems along the way, if your horse has an injury, some swelling, whatever, I suspect those people are more inclined to say, okay, nope, let's just give it some more time. And I respect that. That's what you should do. Uh, People who go ahead and start training their horses while they're young, those people are actually doing what's best for the skeleton,
Hmm.
but they might be inclined to say, I got this futurity coming up, this show, this race. and it's on such and such a date, and we're going to make it work. That's what's not in the best interest of the horses. If you can train them young, allow lots of stress to the skeleton while they're young and growing so it becomes strong, and still have the patience when something goes wrong to not hide it, not try to mask a problem, but say, oh, you know what? Things happen. We need to set back a little bit, allow that body to repair itself. That's the best recipe to avoiding injury.
Mm.
So,
Because I think it is important, I guess, to make it clear that when we're talking about, working young horses, it is and stressing their skeleton, it's within what the skeleton can handle. So it needs to be
yes,
done carefully. We're not talking about working 2-year-olds so hard and then, injecting joints to cover up pain and doing all of that
yes.
stuff that will rapidly bring a young horse undone. It's exercise in a very controlled way, but with the skeleton's like development, I guess, and long-term health in mind.
And you bring up two other points that one is injecting joints to mask things with corticosteroids. And I believe probably the vast majority of catastrophic breakdowns that we've seen in racehorses is due to people injecting with corticosteroids. And I have pretty good documentation of a lot of that stuff happening because you cannot heal a joint in a couple of days. But you can go ahead and have a horse not realize it has a joint problem by injecting it. Um, Pain is there for a reason. It says, don't do this. And there was a quote I loved. I can't remember who it was. I saw it was on a tweet, and this a person nailed it perfectly, which is something to the effect that if you are injecting a joint, you are admitting you have a problem. And if you have a problem, you shouldn't be racing that horse. The other thing that I want to talk about, it goes back to the early training and controlled, and we've done a lot of research with that here now at Michigan State, is this idea of circular exercise. And we have so many horse people that is their go-to. When it comes to lunging young horses, that's often how they get their exercise. I find it ironic that we have people who talk about, well, you shouldn't be training these young horses, meaning riding them, but you can do so much groundwork, you can lunge them and all that stuff. And I'm thinking, you realize you are really damaging the joints quite often when you're lunging your horses because it's unbalanced exercise. You're loading one part of the joint much more than the other part. We're actually creating a lot of those same problems. I'm not saying we can totally get away from circular exercise, but don't do any more of that than you need. Like, if you need to let your horse so it doesn't like buck you off, I get it. That's okay. Um, if you're lunging your horse every day because, well, that's what you do, because that's what we do. No, you realize you are probably causing problems. I look at all the people that give fake joint supplements, my term, because we could have a long conversation on joint supplements, whether they work or not, or inject joints and all these things. We look at all the people, all the disciplines that do that. And one thing that we have in common is there's a lot of circles
Mm.
that are being done. I love riding reining horses. You have to circle. I get it. But doing more than you need is a problem. So that's a whole nother topic, a whole nother time. I don't want to get too much talk on joints and tendons and all
Yeah,
that.
and I think we need to be careful to separate out too, like, there's sports that do compete horses very young that in ways maybe that is not in the best interest of the horse, and then there's exercising horses when they're young and doing this high speed exercise, but in controlled amounts in a straight line to
Right.
allow the skeleton to adapt. So we need to be kind of careful to separate out those two things so that they don't become confounded. And we have, sometimes horse owners will get upset saying, oh, yeah, it's too much. It's not fair on the horses. It's a welfare issue. But it's actually a welfare issue, not allowing them the exercise that they evolved to have. I mean, horses were not in stalls. I said in the very first podcast I did, I talk about feeding your horse like a horse, and talk about their evolutionary time frame. So they've been evolving for 55 million years, and research that was only released last year said that they've only been closely associated with humans for 4,200 years. So if we stretch that timescale out to 10 kilometers, so 10,000 meters, right? The time that they've been with humans is 760 no, hang on. 76 centimeters, not even a step. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Wow.
so it gives you a sense for the horses did their own thing for 99.99% of their time on the earth, and then we've come in the last 0.01% of their time and decided that we know how to do things differently, but we actually have stuffed it up quite dramatically, and a lot of what we're seeing with these bone health issues is us not honoring that evolution.
Right. Yes.
And so coming back to providing access to high speed exercise, be it free pasture turnout or be it under saddle in a very controlled manner, it just means that we're honouring their evolution and allowing their bones to bend as they would if they were wild young horses.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't expect us to take a human athlete and stick him in a dorm room and not allow him to do anything
No.
for.
Yeah, and we all know, I mean, all of us as parents know how unwell our children would be if we did that to them. And there's so many skeletal issues in young people these days because they don't exercise as much as
And then I always want to qualify. I get it. Again, if you have a racetrack where you have 2,000 horses there, you can't turn them all out. That just doesn't work. So then what you need to do is figure out how to go ahead and modify bone so that it is strong and it doesn't take much. That's what's so cool is one, bone has the need for speed, and two, it doesn't take that much to make it strong. Those two things, it's kind of nice to know.
Yeah. It's
Also,
very,
be
very
careful about-
convenient that it doesn't take much. It just takes a small tap
Yeah.
on the shoulder and go, oi, you need to be this strong. Yeah.
Yep. And again, I'm a fan of slow for the mind.
Also cardiovascularly and muscularly and surely for their tendons and ligaments, like all the other bits benefit from that long, slow work. And in fact, I have my two young horses who are 4-year-olds now, but we've been riding them since they were 2-year-olds. And I've not galloped them under saddle, but they're in a 30-acre pasture.
They're doing it their own.
So
Yeah.
I don't need to gallop them. So I mean that's the I guess the most ideal situation, and they're not being worked so hard that they're tired and not running around. They still run around.
A very important thing, there was a paper published in the Australian Vet Journal, I believe, in 1973 by Mason and Burke, who I've never met, for reasons you can guess. They looked at 2-year-old thoroughbreds in race training. They radiographed them and they characterized them by whether they had their knees open when they started training, closed, or intermediate. And what was interesting is I'm assuming they thought they were going to see more injuries and problems with horses that started training when they had open knees.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, that wasn't the case. Their studies showed that horses that started training with open knees, which a lot of our horse industry would say, whoa, you don't want to ride them until their knees are closed. But a lot of the horses that started racing and training when their knees were open were able to complete all this race series without injury. Whereas a lot of them that started training when their knees were closed actually had injuries, and some of them weren't even able to complete their very first race before injury. And what was funny about it is they tried to justify it. They said, oh, there must have been some nutritional thing that caused earlier ossification of their bone. And it's funny, it was 1973. They did not talk bone modeling back then. I forget. They had a great research project that showed if you start them training younger, they have less injuries. They didn't because it was 1973. Ironically, it's 2025, and we still have people that don't want to believe what the science says. So even that one, which is such a perfect study,
Yeah.
and the authors didn't even believe what they were saying.
Yeah. It's okay. I feel your pain. I mean, we've known probably for that same amount of time how damaging raw corn is in the gut of a horse, and yet most of our racing industry still feeds it. So we'll get there eventually.
Hey, maybe.
So my important question is, as a nutritionist, we can fix so much stuff with good nutrition, but we can't fix this with good nutrition. So I've just answered the question that I was going to ask you, but you have done a study on this. Like, what role does nutrition play? I guess in bone health would be the question. Where does it fit in?
Good nutrition is absolutely critical. You need the parts to it. But good nutrition can't fix or replace a lack of the appropriate exercise.
Mm-hmm.
There is no way you can have super strong bone just through good nutrition. I remember my first graduate student, Kari Hoekstra, she was presenting at a research meeting where she was presenting this bone loss situation associated with stalling. And Dr. David Kronfeld, who's the older generation, and he kind of used to intimidate grad students. He starts to stand up after her presentation was over, and he goes, "We did some similar work at Virginia Tech and found the same thing." And he sat down. I was like, "Oh, Kari, you suck. You got off so easy." But what was interesting about the study they did, they were feeding twice the NRC recommended amounts of calcium and when they put horses in stalls, and they still lost bone mass. You can't fix because the body, it says we don't need to carry around extra if we don't need it. And that simply boils down to, so adding everything else on top of it isn't going to fix it. But you do those building blocks in order to have it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And particularly, I guess, when you've got your horses in an exercise regime and or with free turnout, and the bone is in a process of strengthening, it's going to be looking around for the calcium, phosphorus, magnesium predominantly that it needs. And if that's not there, then you're not going to build strong bones. So it's got to be. We can't fix it with nutrition, but if we don't have the nutrition right when we've got them in these exercise programs, we're going to end up in a similar place in that you'll still have weak bone because you're stressing it, but you're not feeding it properly.
exactly.
Mm.
Yep.
And
You need them both. Plain and simple.
yeah. And I will just say here, it's not, and I know you know this, Brian, I'm not telling you this, I'm telling for people who are listening, it's not just calcium. We need to have calcium in the right ratio with magnesium in the right ratio with phosphorus, so that they've got all three bone minerals there, and in a way that can be absorbed from the gut and then made available to the bone.
Yep.
So
All good.
for anyone who's listening to this and now feeling completely overwhelmed with all of the information that we've just thrown at them, what are the simplest pieces of advice you would give any horse owner around bone health?
Sure. I'll make it really simple. Again, need for speed.
Mm-hmm.
If you're getting no speed, you're not going to have strong bone. You don't need much speed.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I ask my students, how much turnout time do you think a horse needs in order to have strong bones? And my answer is, well, probably like 5 seconds. If you have a horse in a stall and it's an athletic horse, you turn it loose within 5 seconds, it's going to sprint off. Good luck catching it after those 5 seconds, but it doesn't take much. Don't hide pain. Oftentimes people want to hide pain. The
Excellent.
horses,
Excellent
whatever.
advice.
No. Pain's there for a reason. It says, don't do this. And then the final thing is, if you have an injury, give it time to repair. I mean, it will take some time. If you do that, keep those things in mind, you're probably going to be fine. And avoid too much circular exercise. Again, we could have a whole nother session on that.
Yeah,
but
which we might do another day if you're happy to come back and talk about that, because that is a big thing for people, and I'd also absolutely love to do one on joint supplements with you in a few months' time.
In a few months, we will count on that.
Yeah, and I'll add to that advice too, just to make sure that the diet is balanced. So calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, and then there's a whole bunch of other nutrients too. So a lot of the amino acids go into building bone. Copper and zinc have got a role in there. And of course, the easiest way to get your diet balanced is to use some kind of really funky tool like the My Happy Horse virtual nutritionist, which will pull your horse's diet together for you in no time at all. You'll be able to see exactly what nutrients you've got in there, what their ratios are to one another, so that you can make sure your horse's diet is balanced when you put them into an exercise regime that's going to support their bone health. So, Brian, I know we've got to finish up. I've got a couple of really quick, I've called it the clear, what have we called it? The clear, round, quick questions with no refusals for you. Are you ready?
Yes.
What is your all-time favorite horse movie or book?
Okay, I'm going to choose 2 books. I'm going to say The Horse NRC, the 2007 version. Not really. Yes, it's great and useful, but actually the other more entertaining one is there is a book called Horse Trading by Ben Green. He was a veterinarian about 100 years ago down in Texas. This dude knew horses. Recommend it. Horse Trading, Tradin.
Very Dixon.
If you know about horses, because a lot of horse books just kill me because they're written by people who don't know about horses. This guy knows about them. Yes.
And just, can you see over my shoulder there, the black book sitting on my desk?
Is that the NRC?
That is the
Oh,
NRC.
cool. I had it earlier sitting on my desk also.
Yeah,
Good try.
it's been as I build out these nutrition equations for the Happy Horse software, it's been in a lot of use. So, next question: what is one myth about horse care you wish you would disappear forever?
Don't treat them with kid gloves, then expect them to be tough. I feel bad for these racehorse trainers who get these horses worth millions of dollars. Um, Not really. I'd love to have those, but those horses, those are the horses that have probably been handled incorrectly, and then we wonder why they get injured a lot. It's like, if you treat them like a baby, they're going to be a wimp.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
If you could ride any horse, past or present, which horse would it be?
Secretariat.
Oh,
Here in the
oh.
States, he was one of the great ones. It'd be a slow ride right now since he's been dead for a while. But back in his time, it would have been pretty cool.
Yeah, imagine being on one of those horses. Be mind
That would
blowing.
have been fun.
The
Yes,
power that they
exactly.
have is amazing. And in the last 2 minutes that we've got, and you don't need to take 2 minutes to answer the question, if you had 2 minutes with every horse owner in the world, what would you tell them?
I'd say listen to your horse. I mean, oftentimes these mental issues, they're created because we don't listen to them. Let them be a horse. We often do what we think is best for our horses, like, oh, I'm buying a horse. I need a barn and I need to stick it in a stall and all. It's not necessarily what the horse ideally wants. Realistically, so many times you have a great horse and then he starts to become a jerk. There's something he's trying to tell you. Oftentimes we get after the horse for doing something wrong, when in reality, we are the ones who are doing something wrong and we just haven't taken the time to listen to him.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's so
So
true too. Yeah.
kind of does, sadly.
Brian,
So
thank you so, so much for your time. That has been,
Nerida, it's been a blast as always. And yeah, we'll do this again.
oh, I'd love to. Thanks.
You have a great one. Bye bye.
See you, you too. Gosh, conversations with Brian are always so insightful. A huge thank you to Brian for sharing his expertise on bone health in horses. We covered so much today. If there's one key takeaway, it's that movement at speed is essential to keep bones strong. If you loved this episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming discussion on joint supplements. It is going to be good. And Brian has promised to get me back for his question about his rabbit. So, if for no other reason, you should catch our next conversation for that. If you want to dive deeper into Brian's research, he has an open access Animals 2023 journal paper titled A Review of 3 Decades of Research Dedicated to Making Equine Bones Stronger, Implications for Horses and Humans. It summarises all of the research he briefly mentioned today and a lot more. And of course, if you want to check and see if your horse's diet is supporting their bone health, head on over to myhappy.horse. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, keep your horses happy, healthy, and moving. If you'd like to know more about the My Happy Horse virtual equine nutritionist, you can head on over to myhappy.horse. And also, while you're there, check out the Dr Nerida AI, which is me in AI format. And that version of me is happy to answer your questions about horse nutrition 24/7. Thanks again, and we'll catch you soon.